the things that we're doing right now have a huge impact.
What I love about Civic Eye is the opportunity to change the world and have an immediate impact on law enforcement.
Charlotte, North Carolina-based Civic Eye. It's a startup focused on solving long-time policing problems, and it's among the new entrants to the GovTech 100 for 2024. Also new this year, the infusion of private equity into the GovTech sector. It brings with it fresh money and higher expectations to the hard work of making government better. All of that coming up.
TFIC takes you deeper into the stories that are shaping the future of state and local government.
Final frontier. To boldly go where no man has gone before.
You're not Buzz Lightyear.
I'm Siri.
And I'm Google.
And I am Alexa.
Alexa seems so smart, I think we'd have a lot to talk about.
Pew, pew. From government technology and governing, this is The Future in Context. With Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor. Happy New Year, Ashley.
Happy New Year, Paul. We made it to another year. I'm very excited about what's to come for eRepublic and government technology in 2024.
Very good. And one of the harbingers for that is something called the GovTech 100. It's something that government technology has been doing for 8 years now. And it's a list of 100 startup companies that have been innovating in and disrupting the GovTech market. Government has benefited a lot from these companies, and we see their impact on the market. Ben Miller has curated the list over the years, and he'll be joining us in this episode. Plus, there's a new twist this year.
In the cover story of the January issue of the magazine, Thad Reuter takes a closer look at the rise of private equity in GovTech companies.
Thad, let's begin with you and your cover story in the January issue of Government Technology. Now, to paraphrase an old country song, we were GovTech before GovTech was cool. Given the rapid growth of private equity in the segment, it would appear that GovTech's cool factor is on the rise. Why is that?
There are a couple of reasons for that, according to the people that I've been talking to. Number one, it is still perceived as relatively recession-proof. Governments have to pay their bills, and people need services, and the tech that powers those services in the GovTech space. As well, private equity has money it needs to put to work, and why not put it to work in a space where analog is being replaced by digital processes, and where a lot of cloud adaptation is taking place. That's the private equity view on this. It's a relatively healthy and safe space, and everyone needs GovTech.
At one point in the cover story, you write that private equity sees GovTech as a fertile land on the brink of major sustained development. What makes that so?
Number one is software as a service. The growth of that, cloud-based services. Another reason too is what I call the Amazon effect, because I'm, excuse the cliche on that. People have been trained by Amazon to expect one-click, very quick service via a single platform. If you talk to the CEOs of some of these GovTech companies that have attracted major private equity backing, that's kind of their overall goal. They want to be that platform provider. They want to provide these quick services to a generation of consumers and constituents who've been trained by Amazon, and that is one of those are some of the reasons it is seen as a fertile field by the private equity backers in there. As well, there's just a lot of work to bring government into the modern age, into the 21st century, and that's going to require a lot of money and a lot of revenue flowing from that.
And it strikes me that the Amazon model is something that has been and remains aspirational, and drawing in behind that, you can attract a lot of money.
It's funny because
yes,
we've been hearing
absolutely.
this for years. When it comes to Amazon, we've been hearing mostly from government, but also from the private industry side. We all are trying to emulate Amazon, and people expect us to be like Amazon. If you're going online and handling your business in a couple of clicks, why can't you do the same thing when you need to renew your driver's license, license your business, whatever it is that you're doing with the government. Pay your utility bill.
What do you think about the match or the mismatch between that aspiration and reality on the ground?
One of the things I worry about in terms of, making sure the right tech gets to the right people and everything is done in a correct, efficient manner. Amazon serves customers. Amazon doesn't serve constituents. I think that's a big difference. GovTech isn't commerce, and I think that means a lot. I mean, there was this, I remember doing a story 20 years ago where one of the city managers in this small town in Florida I covered, he started, instead of calling people citizens or constituents, he started calling them customers. I remember the Chicago Transit Authority started to do that in the early 2000s when I lived up there, and I did a story on that. And I think there's limitations to how far that can go. I think there's a lot of good that can come from that because that's how we are trained. We are trained as consumers. But I mean, government has to serve everybody, no matter what. Amazon has to serve only the people that want to buy from Amazon. And I think that model goes only so far.
You're absolutely
and that
right.
Great technologist Thomas Jefferson, he once said that the highest office in the land is that of citizen, and customer doesn't get all the way there.
You're absolutely right that about the difference between Amazon and government, and the reason why they'll never be one and the same. There are some places where they become pretty similar to each other, and that's the places where government is, in fact, engaging in a financial transaction with the citizen, and that's where you're starting to see some of those practices coming over, not quite one-to-one, but close when it comes to the basic steps of having an online login with a profile that stores information from your previous transactions. Mm-hmm. You have a wallet with a card that can be remembered, and you don't have to re-enter your information, and some form of identity verification that's non-intrusive but valid. And that tends to be in places like DMV or licensing, especially when it comes to things like recreation, recreational licensing, hunting, fishing, camping, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
But yeah, you're right also, that government has a lot more people that it has to answer to, and it has higher standards and regulations that it has to follow.
And it doesn't have a corporate board of directors. It doesn't have shareholders. It has elected officials. It has compliance that Amazon doesn't always have to do. A government, and not to get too far off the beaten path, government has its own delivery system, the U.S. Postal Service, but Amazon is building its own, and it's probably going to be much more efficient, depending on what point of view. But to bring private equity back into this, private equity, at least according to the people I've been talking to, according to the sources for this story, private equity does see the big opportunity in trying to build these end-to-end platforms that are, gaining popularity in the GovTech space. So I think, private equity is really going to fuel a lot more of that. But again, constituents versus consumers, there's a big difference between two. I don't know how it's going to play out, but it is going to play out. I mean, there's only so far you can go with
that. The end-to-end platform concept and private equity, they fit very naturally together because if you think about private equity's place in the investment ecosystem, they're late stage. They're not angel investors, seed investors, venture capitalists, accelerators. Those are early stage, getting companies off the ground and finding their business model, their product market fit. Private equity is typically for later in a company's life cycle where they're ready to go to the next step. And private equity wants to give that money the capital to not only expand into new markets, but to acquire other companies. That's one of the main ways that private equity firms make money is you do second tier acquisitions and then merge the companies together to expand them into new markets, to consolidate market share. And the idea of going to a platform model where a company may have originally had a point solution or a relatively narrow platform or piece of software fits very naturally with that concept of private equity, where they're trying to bring different companies together. They're trying to grow into different verticals or other areas of the market. And so I think that's a part of why this is private equity's moment in GovTech, is a lot of these companies that have been gestating for years and going through the earlier stages of the cycle are ready for this now, and they're starting to find those opportunities of how to grow.
On the road to end-to-end platforms, what's driving private equity in this space?
Well, in this space, I think it's also I think private equity is probably noticing that when it comes to public agencies, there's a lot of desire to just deal with one vendor instead of a handful of vendors. I think that if they're seeing it through the eyes of the public agencies, I think that is a part of it too. And with cloud-based services, it's just becoming easier to offer basically what I call one-stop shopping. Excuse the consumer metaphor there, I guess, but one that's just easy. I mean, we mentioned recreation and gaming and hunting permits. Tyler is into this space. There are a few other companies that are getting into this space, like Pay It for instance, and they are kind of showing how it's done. I mean, Pay It is an interesting. I'm getting a little bit off track here. Pay It is an interesting company to watch because they're offering payments and permitting, tools for their customers out there, and those are kind of naturally together as well. I also think private, and I mentioned this in my cover story. Private equity is also seeing when it comes to the platforms, to the growth of these GovTech companies, they're seeing opportunities for quote unquote inorganic growth. Put a puzzle piece here, put a puzzle piece here. And, again, one-stop shopping. But I think those are some of the opportunities that private equity is seeing right now.
Two of the companies that you mentioned in the cover story are Excella and Granicus. What can we learn from those experiences as we look at the market?
Granicus, I think you can learn, and I kind of described the path, what has happened to Granicus in terms of its growth and acquisition via private equity backing. I think you can learn what might happen to other companies in a general way, how they're going to use that growth, how they're going to use that private equity funding and energy and expertise to add to their offerings. Acela, I think they're going to offer similar examples as time goes on, maybe even next year. They obviously are not closing down a door to future acquisitions, but I also think I also think that company offers an example of how private equity is coming in, behind another private equity firm. You have one or two private equity firms in the beginning, then another private equity firm comes in. Someone takes over the majority on the board, and that just shows just how attractive these platform and other GovTech companies are to private equity firms.
Ben had mentioned that this being private equity's moment in GovTech. Thad, in the cover story, you talk about a 575% year-over-year growth in private equity investment from some $110 million to $675 million in investment this year. What are the upsides and downsides of that growth that fast?
Just to be clear, that's for a broader space than the GovTech space, but it's still huge. One of the upsides, I think, is obvious. Just more funding. Funding can pay for hiring. Funding can pay for acquisitions. Funding can pay for geographic expansions, geographic and market expansions. Funding can pay for cutting edge research and development into new GovTech tools. But the real and potential downsides of all that are kind of the same as they are for all private equity. Private equity is going to be pretty keen on seeing results, and seeing results, maybe not within a year, but within a few years down the road. What does that mean? Well, it can mean layoffs. It can mean sometimes cutting up companies for parts. It can mean all those other things that have sparked worries about private equity in other sectors, such as the retail sector, which I mentioned in my story as well.
So that's the cover story, but the GovTech 100 really is 100 different stories that play out line by line on a long list. And government technology has been at that for 8 years now. The 2024 list is the 8th. The first one really showcased scrappy little startups that were based on innovation and disrupting a sleepy market segment. Ben, you've been at this for a long time during the brief history of the GovTech 100. How would you characterize the newest GovTech 100 and what makes it different from the earlier ones?
One thing that we've done different this year is we have decided to focus a little bit more on the newcomers. And part of the reason why is a little bit of this market consolidation that we've been talking about, private equity coming in, a lot of different companies merging. I think one interesting thing actually is you're starting to see fairly regularly now serial entrepreneurs in this space, people who already had an exit and are jumping back into the market saying, I want to try again, I have another idea. And that's a little bit of an overview of the difference in this year's list.
I just wanted to add to his point about the serial entrepreneurs and public companies. One of the I noticed this year as I interviewed these companies and as I interviewed the CEOs and the founders, and not all these companies made the list. I'm thinking of some companies that came pretty close. I'm getting more of a sense, yeah, they're serial entrepreneurs, but I'm also getting, more than a few of these younger founders really do have a genuine dedication to the GovTech space or to the public service space for various reasons too. Some of them, their relatives were like ward workers or city employees, and they have good memories of that. I've done a few stories on that, and I've just found that terribly exciting this year.
Yeah,
Very good.
absolutely.
And Ben, you mentioned new companies this year. Who are they, and what makes them notable?
We've got a few public safety companies new to the list this year. Civic Eye, Fieldware, and Versaterm are among the companies now on the list. Versaterm is definitely a standout there. They've been a very interesting company because in recent years they took some private equity investment and then suddenly just started making acquisitions left and right. I believe it's 8 since their private equity investment several years ago now, and they've grown very, very, very rapidly to the point where it's still kind of hard to say what the future holds for the company. We're still kind of trying to see how things shake out there, but that is one example of the kind of swift market shaking power that private equity can have when they jump in is in Versaterm. There are a few others. One thing we've done a little bit more of in recent years that I am proud of is the list starting to embrace some really focused niches, some narrow spaces in here. One example of a company I believe was new to the list last year was the Library Corporation, and libraries is unfortunately a small enough space that we don't get to cover it all that much on GovTech. But when we do, boy, is it interesting, and boy, do libraries serve a great function in local government.
Yes.
And in communities. It's really something that's almost always handled at the smallest local level, and they provide so many things within the community. Absolutely fascinating space. New to the list this year is Harris Local Government, which is very focused on accounting and I believe on fund accounting specifically in local governments. So one of those things where it's not necessarily a huge thing that you're going to be hearing about in the daily news or anything, but very important in local governments and the kind of thing that if a company gets into this space, they can really go deep on it. We've also got a few procurement companies in here, City Innovate and Pavilion. I think Conveo is a really interesting newcomer to the list this year because they kind of straddle this space of community engagement and document management. They're all about providing government with tools to not just put information online, but give people a way to directly engage with that information on the document itself, give feedback, play with it, engage with it beyond simply reading words on a screen. And then there are several others. I'll just run through them quickly that I haven't mentioned. GovOS, HData, JustFOIA, Polymorphic, Public Input, and Thentia Cloud are also newcomers.
Thinking about 2024 and beyond, what should public agencies and public officials, elected appointeds, be thinking about when considering buying from or engaging with a GovTech 100 company that might be different than engaging with an older established incumbent?
I think one thing is, how many vendors do you want to deal with when things go south, and how often do you want to deal with them? I think they got to think about that. I think they got to think a lot about the younger residents and constituents who are coming up, and they're going to have much different expectations for the tech than some of us relatively older folks. And I mean, that seems obvious, but I think that's going to pick up a lot. I also think they should think harder about the public safety space. It's not a news story that public safety is hot, but I think it's getting hotter. And I think that the police staffing shortage is a long term problem that's not going to be easily solved. I mean, I don't think tech is going to 100% solve it, but I think tech's going to become much more important. I think there's just going to be increasing competition in that space, which means more potential choice for the public agencies buying tech. And also, as Ben mentioned earlier, what comes next for consolidation in this space? It's always a big thing. And will there be another IPO ever coming up, or when? About when, perhaps? And those are more of the higher level things that I am looking for too, as well.
Ben, you say what?
There are a lot of things, and to be clear, there are larger, more established companies on the list still that'll be probably going through a little bit more of the traditional procurement processes. When it comes to these younger companies, the startups, the ones that are going through the early investment cycle, as well as the ones that are growing rapidly due to larger investments, there are a few things that I think of. One, at the State of GovTech conference that we just had in Foster City, California, I heard a lot about local government, especially all government, but local government especially, being overwhelmed with workforce shortages, mounting needs, things that piled up during the pandemic sometimes, and their need to have disruptive changes in their processes quickly, solutions that really make an impact, not just coming in and moving the needle, but giving you a new needle, if that makes sense as a metaphor. um, I think when you're looking at startups, they're bringing new ideas. That's the idea of a startup. Even if it's the same space, they have competitors that might be a little bit more established. They're typically coming in and trying to do something new, trying to make the whole process faster, or give you a new way to go about doing things that'll just speed everything up. So I think I would say, look within your organization at your needs. Is there a problem that you've been sitting on for a while that you just haven't found a good solution for? Maybe there's somebody out there in the market who just came around, who now has a new approach that might be exactly what you're looking for, or maybe they have some ideas that might help point you in the right direction. Uh, Even just looking at some of these tools, you start to see some best practices. You start to see things coming in from the software industry as a whole that are just better ways to build technology for any user, whether that's in government or not. And they've taken it and they've applied it specifically to government. But even if that particular solution is not for you, maybe it shows you something that you didn't know existed before that can push you in the right direction. I would say when you're engaging with them, keep in mind that they're hungry, so they're looking for opportunities. I think they're likely to try to please, and to be very responsive to you, and to work with you very closely. Especially if that's how you approach it, and B, you especially might need a little bit of flexibility, trying things out before committing to something big. Maybe a shorter term paid pilot, or some kind of evaluation along those lines. And last, I would just keep in mind, depending on where a company is in the investment cycle, investment is a vote of confidence in a company from an investor, and that extra money means that they will have a bit of a runway, a bit of wiggle room to keep things going. It also means that somebody made a bet on this company growing, changing, getting bigger. Their focus might change over time as you're working with this company. Their focus might get diluted as they grow their customer base a little bit. They might acquire another company. and then kind of change what they're doing a little bit. And that can be a mixed bag. It could be a lack of focus, or it could be that they're suddenly coming to you with a solution that's 3 times better than it was a month ago because now it's integrated with something else, and they can now pull in extra data free of charge or for a small premium. It also means that you can kind of grow organically with these companies too. If you find yourself using it for one use case and then they come to you and say, hey, we have another customer that is just like you and they started using us for this thing that we never considered, maybe you could try that as well. Or we just acquired this company, are you interested in expanding to include this part of your system on top of what you're already using us for?
Ben Miller and Thad Reuter are behind this month's cover story in government technology on the 2024 GovTech 100.
Thank you, Paul.
The editorial and production team behind TFIC includes Noel Nell, Aragon Item, Zoe Manzanotti, and Kaylee Tedrow. Our editor-in-chief is Kathleen Robinette.
We're bringing in 2024 with all new episodes of TFIC featuring insightful interviews and exclusive content that places the tech future in context. Subscribe for free on YouTube or the podcast app of your choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, or Audible.
And that will do it for us this time around. Next time out, we begin to unpack the issues to watch for the new year with the editors and writers from Governing. That's next time. For Ashley Silver, I'm Paul Taylor. Thanks for listening, and Happy New Year. Stay in touch with the show at tfic.tech.